What would you do if the very people meant to protect your neighborhood tried to destroy the last thing your family ever built? Imagine waking up to find strangers planning to tear apart your dock, the one place tied to your father's memory, and laughing while they fine you for even trying to stop them. This isn't just a story about an HOA. It's about betrayal, rage, and one man who decided to turn his pain into the most brutal payback they never saw coming. Before we get into how this all exploded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. And if you love seeing HOA bullies get what they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Damian Cross stands at the edge of his dock with a stack of violation papers biting into his palm. Knuckles white, breathing through the ache that comes when grief collides with fury. He hears Sierra Lane before he sees her, the tight, clipped cadence of a person who loves rules more than people, announcing that the demolition crew is scheduled. The dock is illegal, and compliance is not optional. Damian's jaw locks. This dock is the last thing his father built with him, a promise hammered into wood. He answers with a steady voice that shakes anyway, telling her to back off. Sierra smiles in white like it's a uniform and not a choice. A smile that says, "This is sport." She steps closer and slaps a fresh notice against his chest, the paper crinkling like a dare. Her board members snicker behind her, parroting her lines about community standards and fines that multiply by the day. Damian asks why a community that claims safety is trying to erase the one place families share memories. Sierra answers with a shrug that calls memories sentimental clutter. She turns, satisfied, and tells him he has until tomorrow. The board members follow, their laughter trailing like a loose screw. Damian doesn't sleep that night. He spreads the letters across his table, every fine, every photo, every smug apology that never apologized. He hears his father's voice telling him that fight and plan are not the same thing. So he plans. He drives out before dawn and demands records, not favors. At the clerk's desk, he reads numbers that don't add up and signatures that repeat like stamps. He finds the line that changes everything. Tax delinquency, HOA Clubhouse, foreclosure pending. The clubhouse, their pride, their stage, their pulpit, is about to be yanked from under them. For the first time in weeks, his breathing slows. He walks into the surprise HOA meeting like a ghost who learned how to smile. The room buzzes with loyalists and frightened neighbors pretending they're not frightened. Sierra stands at the front with a stack of agendas and a microphone voice even without a microphone. She boasts about removing nuisances and resetting standards. An emphasis on removing that lands like a threat. Damian sits in the back, shoulders loose, hands empty on purpose. When Sierra finally notices him, her eyes narrow. He offers her the smallest grin, the kind that says a secret has already started. The board rushes through motions designed to look legal. Damian watches the rhythm of power dress itself in procedure. He studies faces, the treasurer who avoids eye contact, the secretary whose pen shakes, the neighbor who came for answers and stays for drama. Sierra calls for a vote to authorize immediate demolition. Hands rise quickly. Damian's stays down. He doesn't speak. She thrives when people argue with her. Silence unnerves her more than defiance. He lets it sit. When the meeting ends, neighbors spill into whispers. A mother asks him if he's going to fight it. Damian nods without bravado. He thanks her for caring when the people in charge don't. Sierra brushes past him and mutters that rules always win. Damian leans close enough for her to hear the words meant for the whole room. Not when the rules are rotten. The color rises in her cheeks. She recovers with a smile that insists she's already won. He leaves without looking back. In his truck, he places his father's old keyring on the dash like a compass and drives to a quiet office where numbers decide fates. At the counter, he requests confirmation, and the clerk confirms it with the indifference of a stamp. The HOA Clubhouse goes to auction at midnight tomorrow. Final call after years of negligence hidden in spreadsheets and long meetings. Damien thanks the clerk and steps aside, palms sweating, vision narrowing to a single thought. If they take the dock, he takes their stage. He spends the afternoon making calls he never wanted to make. An old friend who knows property law. A neighbor who hates bullies but hates chaos more. A contractor who has seen too many boards pretend compassion while cashing checks. He doesn't ask for permission. He gathers proof. He stacks it all beside his father's photo and repeats a promise that's used. To be about surviving, and now is about ending the cycle. He won't trade kindness for weakness again. As the sun drops, he returns to the lake. The board has already marked his dock with a bright tag that screams deadline. He tears it off and folds it like a flag no longer recognized. Sierra appears at the property line, the whites still immaculate, and laughs that vandalism carries a higher fine. Damien says fines don't frighten people who have already lost everything once. She steps closer, edges sharpened by victory, and whispers that some men aren't built for neighborhoods. He answers that some neighborhoods aren't built for people. Night crawls, and with it, a revelation. Fear kept him negotiating with people who never negotiated in good faith. He finally allows anger to stand without apology. He opens his laptop and pulls up the county portal. The auction listing glows like a fuse. HOA Clubhouse. Starting bid posted. Clock ticking down. He reads the terms twice, 3 times, waiting for the trick. There is none. Their house of rules is a house with a mortgage they forgot to pay. He imagines the morning after he wins. Sierra marching to the clubhouse to plan his humiliation and finding a banner she cannot rip down. He imagines neighbors stepping out not to watch a man punished, but to watch a bully meet a boundary. He imagines the police called to rescue power only to witness proof. He imagines the quiet on his dock when the storm finally realizes it cannot move him. He steadies his breathing and lets the vision harden into decision. Midnight approaches. The portal asks for a number that hurts but does not break him. He enters it with the steadiness his father taught him when a board wouldn't sink unless you leaned into it. The bid registers. The bar turns green. Competing numbers flash. Small bursts of panic from shadows he can't see. He raises once, twice, holding his nerve while his chest drums like a warning. A final counter arrives late and loud, the kind of number thrown by people who think intimidation is a strategy. Damien answers with everything left that isn't fear. The countdown burns toward 0. He stares at the screen, at the words that will obliterate every smirk she wore to his doorstep. Winning bidder, pending confirmation. Payment required by morning. He feels the shift before the numbers stop shifting, the way a storm breaks a second before the first drop. His finger hovers over the final authorization, breath held at the edge of the cliff as the timer blinks and the room seems to lean forward with him, waiting to see if he jumps or if he flies. The bid clears before dawn, and Damien walks out with a receipt and a key ring that weighs like justice. He doesn't celebrate. He drives straight to the clubhouse and turns the lock with a steady hand. Each click a reply to every fine they ever pushed through. A red banner unfurls across the doors. Letters bold enough to bruise. Closed forever. He steps back, breathes once, and lets the silence say the rest. Sierra arrives early with a contractor and the swagger of someone who expects doors to open when she appears. She spots Damien on the steps and freezes at the keys swinging from his finger. Her voice jumps before her feet do, sharp as a blade, demanding he move. Demanding he explain himself. Demanding the banner come down. Damien answers with a calm that stings. The clubhouse has a new owner, and the rules she worships work both ways. The contractor studies the ground like it might swallow him if he looks up. She charges to tear the banner. But Damien steps into her path and she halts a breath away, fury sparking. He tells her the deeds are filed and the taxes are paid, that he bought the ruin her board pretended not to see. The words land like stones. She spits out that this is fraud and trespass and an embarrassment to the neighborhood. He says the embarrassment started when her board forgot what a neighborhood is for. Neighbors drift closer. Drawn by voices, by whispers traveling faster than cars. Phones lift. The contractor mumbles that he left something in the truck and doesn't come back. Sierra announces that emergency authority overrides any stunt he's pulling. Damien answers that emergency authority ends when the cause of the emergency is incompetence. Her hands clench at her sides. She composes herself with a smile that looks stapled on. Patrol lights roll into view without sirens. 2 officers step out and ask what's happening. Sierra points to Damien fast enough to blur, insisting he broke in, insisting the banner is vandalism, insisting this man is endangering the community. Damien hands over a folder, quiet and complete. Auction confirmation, payment, transfer. The officers read in silence while Sierra fills the air with accusations that wilt the longer they hang there. The first officer raises an eyebrow, looks at her, then at the paperwork again. "Ma'am," it says, "the property was sold yesterday and the transaction is valid." A pause taps through the crowd. The second officer asks Damien if anyone threatened him when he put up the sign. He says only the usual threats dressed up as policy. Sierra's panic mutates into control attempts. She orders the officers to remove the banner anyway. She orders neighbors to disperse. She orders the rules to bend back to her. Authority doesn't move. A neighbor from the next street calls out that this is the first time he's seen paperwork beat politics. Another neighbor laughs softly, a sound that hurts worse than shouting. Sierra turns on them, reminding everyone of bylaws like they are sacred scripture. Damien says bylaws can't baptize bad behavior. Her voice rises to a raw pitch. She jabs a finger toward Damien's dock and claims that unsafe structures must be demolished. That he's a danger to children. That her board is protecting families. He answers that his father taught children to swim off that dock, taught them patience and respect. And the only danger he sees is a board that finds grief like its litter. The words slice through her defenses and nick something tender. She disguises the flinch by stepping closer. The first officer asks for calm and for facts. Damien offers both. He tells them he will provide the full chain of documents to the county by noon. He tells them the next board meeting will be held in the parking lot because the doors behind him are no longer the stage for fear. He doesn't raise his voice. He raises expectations. The officers nod and take notes. Sierra's eyes flash with a calculation that has saved her before. It doesn't save her now. A teenager in the crowd whispers that the clubhouse just switched sides. A father murmurs that maybe the lake belongs to families again. Sierra hears the drift of loyalty and panics harder. She pivots to the camera phones and declares that Damien is a saboteur trying to destroy a community institution. Damien faces the lenses and answers that institutions without integrity deserve a reset. He doesn't play to the crowd. He plays to the line inside every viewer that knows when a bully meets a wall. She tries a final angle. She claims a temporary injunction is on the way. Damien smiles like he's seen this trick and bought the deck anyway. He tells her injunctions need standing, and the only thing standing here is a man who paid the taxes her board ignored. The second officer coughs to hide a laugh and asks both parties to lower voices. Sierra can't. She demands that the officers arrest him. The first officer says there's nothing to arrest. The word nothing lands like a verdict. The tension tilts. Neighbors step closer not to argue, but to witness, as if history needs proximity. Someone asks Damien what happens to the clubhouse now. He lifts the keys and says it will serve the people who were never invited inside. Sierra lunges, not for him, but for the banner, fingers curled to rip. An officer moves between them, hand out, calm but unyielding. Damien lets the pause hold. The crowd breathes in as one. She points at Damien's chest and hurls a promise that she will take everything he loves. He answers with a small, tired smile that says he's already lost everything that could be taken. The line cuts deeper than any shouted threat. Her face reddens. She swallows something sharp and tries again with legalese that used to scare anyone who didn't have a lawyer on speed dial. Damien replies with a rumor-turned-fact. The clubhouse went to auction because the board paid for landscaping, but not the land. The first officer closes his notebook and says the situation is civil, not criminal, and under control. Sierra hears under control as a personal insult. She pivots to Damien and demands he explain how he got the money, as if poverty would make him more palatable. He tells her he sold gear he didn't need and pride he didn't want, that justice asked for a price and he paid it. The honesty disarms every whisper crafted to smear him. A child tugs his mother's sleeve and asks if the doc stays. The mother asks Damien softly, and he says the doc stays as long as families do. Even Sierra hears the vow buried in that sentence. For a second, her face reveals what power kept hidden, the fear of losing a stage. She resets her expression fast. Then faster, when more neighbors arrive, when another phone goes live. When the algorithm smells a reckoning, Damien steps forward with quiet certainty and tells her this moment is not the end. She laughs, brittle and too loud, asking what more he could possibly do. He glances at the officers, at the banner, at the crowd that has learned his name without introduction. He tells her there is one more surprise she hasn't seen, a move he saved for the moment she thought she still held the script. The words hang there between them, heavy as a closing door, and every face tilts toward him. Waiting for the reveal, he refuses to rush. Word spreads like a siren. Neighbors collect at the edge of the moment, a half circle of crossed arms and held breath. Damien leans against the locked door with the keys resting on his knuckles, easy as a verdict, while Sierra paces in white fabric that looks more fragile now that it's being tested. She throws out orders that land nowhere. Someone in the crowd asks if this is real. Damien says it is. And the truth is about to have paperwork. He lifts a slim folder and reads names the board hoped would stay buried in minutes. Dates, totals, delinquent amounts that could have fixed a roof. Helped a family, funded a scholarship, but somehow never reached the county. He holds up the tax record that sent the clubhouse to auction. Gasps break across the crowd like a wave hitting a pier. Sierra laughs on instinct, too loud, insisting the papers are fake. Damien shows the seal, the clerk's signature, the ledger line with a number no one paid. A board member near the back swallows hard and stares at the ground. Sierra tries to pivot from denial to deflection. She points at Damien and says he is twisting narratives to distract from an illegal doc. Damien doesn't blink. He tells them about nights his father chose fines over medication, about watching strength he once believed was endless shrink under the weight of late fees and threats. He says the last conversation they had ended with a promise he couldn't keep then, but he's keeping it now. The crowd quiets, the kind of silence that happens when people feel a story become personal. A neighbor who never speaks at meetings steps forward and says she paid a fine for a flower pot and still got another notice for the same thing. Another adds that his appeals went unanswered for months while fees compounded like a trap. Sierra tells them to calm down, to attend the next meeting, to file forms. The words sound like stale bread. Damien opens another document and reads a list of expenditures that would embarrass any leader with a pulse. A boutique consultant, A retreat that no one remembers attending. A landscaping bill that could have re-landscaped the moon. The treasurer's eyes shine with sudden tears, and he whispers that he warned the board they were overextended. Sierra snaps his name like a leash. The first officer asks for the folder and flips through the pages, jaw tightening at the sequence that leads to foreclosure. He asks Sierra if she knew about the unpaid taxes. She crafts a sentence that says everything and nothing, a sentence she's used to survive. The second officer checks the county link on a phone and shows him the exact lien numbers on the public portal. The crowd murmurs. The board's old aura thins until it looks like fog at noon. Sierra lunges at the Narada like it's a rope she can still grab. She claims the foreclosure was an accounting error and calls the documents misleading. Damien replies that he didn't mislead anyone to a gavel. He holds up the notice of sale. He holds up the payment receipt. He holds up his right to hang a banner across a door that was paid for twice by the people and never once by the truth. Her face hardens into something brittle. She steps so close he can feel the temperature of her anger. She accuses him of exploiting his father's memory for attention. Damien says his father taught him that memory is a promise, not a prop. He tells her the only attention he wants is on the numbers she ignored until they knocked. Something breaks behind her eyes, a sudden understanding that the old tricks are turning to dust in her hands. From the fringe of the crowd, a board member clears his throat and admits he signed votes he never saw because Sierra told him it would keep the neighborhood stable. He apologizes to Damien without looking at him directly, the kind of apology that costs courage when it arrives late. Sierra whirls on him and calls him ungrateful. He flinches. The neighbors see all of it. The dynamic that sat in the background of their lives and quietly shaped. Then Damien takes a breath and slides out the last sheet. He says there's more, and there always is when pride runs an organization. He reads a complaint filed by a widow who was fined for a handrail she couldn't afford to fix. Sierra says the rail was non-compliant. The widow speaks from the crowd, voice steady, and says the board doubled the fine when she asked for time. Damien lets the words do their own work. The officers keep writing. Sierra's control fractures. She strides for Damien, hand outstretched, and snatches at the documents. Paper skitters across the steps, fluttering like startled birds. A neighbor gasps. The first officer moves quickly, hand raised, not aggressive but firm, telling her to stop. She doesn't. She grabs for another sheet, fingers tearing the corner where the county seal sits. The officer's tone sharpens. He tells her that if she interferes with evidence again, he will detain her. The word detain hangs there like a bell tolling a distance that used to feel impossible and now feels very near. Damien kneels and gathers the pages with deliberate care. He isn't rattled. He says these papers aren't theory. They are the trail Sierra didn't expect anyone to follow. She tells him he's finished. He tells her he hasn't even started. People who believed they were powerless start to stand taller. People who were quiet start to speak. The narrative tilts and doesn't tilt back. A teen who grew up on this lake speaks into his phone, streaming to friends who always thought HOA drama was background noise. He tells them to watch this, because for once, the ending doesn't feel rigged. A retired teacher nods along, eyes on Sierra like she's grading a test with only one question. When you were given power, what did you do with it? The answer is on the steps. Sierra turns her attention to the officers, pleading wrapped in authority, asking them to restore order by restoring her control. The first officer keeps his voice level and asks if she's going to comply with a peaceful process. She says she's the peaceful process. The second officer says that's not how it works. Something in Sierra's stance tightens. A last attempt to command a room that no longer salutes. Damien senses the shift and pushes it 1 inch further. He thanks the officers for their time and promises to deliver copies to the station and the county by noon. He thanks the neighbors for showing up and says that's the one thing the board never wanted them to do together. He thanks the treasurer for his honesty, late but real. He even thanks Sierra for making it so obvious what had to change. She answers with a whisper that sounds like a threat wearing perfume. He straightens, closes the folder, and tells the crowd there's one more truth he hasn't spoken aloud. He says the dock they tried to erase is the last place his father told him to stand up for something that matters. And now that he has, he's not stepping aside. Sierra begins to shout over him, a jagged stream of policy and punishment. But the wind goes out of her words when the first officer places a gentle hand between her and the papers and warns her again. This time with the weight of consequence. The nearest phones catch every syllable. Her breath hitches. For a second, her eyes flick to the patrol car, to the quiet possibility that her own rules could escort her away from the stage she built. Pride wrestles with calculation in her throat. She reaches anyway, fingers trembling, and the officer's other hand hovers near his belt, calm, controlled, ready. The crowd tightens, neighbors drawing closer as if unity could anchor the moment. Damien doesn't move. He lets the standoff write its own headline. And as Sierra's hand inches forward one last time, the officer's voice drops to a warning that freezes more than her wrist. The officer's warning cuts through the noise and stills Sierra's hand. Damien doesn't press the advantage. He lets the pause work, then draws a phone from his pocket like a final receipt. He opens a video and turns the screen outward. Frames roll, 3 board members under a weak porch light. Stepping over his fence, prying at a post on the dock, one whispering a threat that lands like a promise. Timestamps glow. Faces are clear. The crowd exhales all at once. Sierra launches into denial on instinct, calling it staged, calling it edited, calling it anything but what it is. The first officer takes the phone and watches with the practiced stillness of someone who has seen enough. Excuses for a lifetime. He rewinds, slows, confirms the house numbers stenciled on the gate. The second officer notes names, pausing on the treasurer's flustered silhouette. The treasurer covers his face and says he warned them not to do it, that he left after the first screw squealed, that he panicked. His voice cracks like a branch. Citations begin to flow, ink scratching the surface of a long-gnawed wound. Trespass, attempted vandalism, disturbing the peace. Sierra argues each one as if objections could turn back time. The first officer answers with calm, patience, and a pen that doesn't lift until the form is complete. Phones in the crowd tilt for the signatures, the rare sight of rules defending the people they were made for. A neighbor murmurs that he's waited years to see accountability wear a badge. Damien keeps his voice low and steady, letting the facts cut where his anger once would have swung. He says the board broke into his yard the same week they voted to demolish his father's work. He says they wanted to create the emergency they needed to seize what was never theirs. He doesn't sermonize. He arranges evidence like chess and invites the ending to reveal itself. Sierra tells him he will regret making enemies. He tells her enemies arrived the day they priced grief by the square foot. The contractor returns from nowhere and admits he was hired for demolition, not maintenance. He says the work order mentions safety, but the instructions were all removal. He shrugs helplessly at the crowd. Sierra snaps that he is misremembering. He pulls a crumpled copy from his pocket and hands it to the second officer. Removal is bolded. Safety is a heading with nothing beneath it. The officer raises an eyebrow that says, enough. Neighbors start speaking like witnesses waking from a spell. A mother announces her ballots were counted after decisions were already made. A veteran says he was fined for a flag bracket installed by the previous owner. An elderly couple describes how fees for a simple paint correction turned into a bill larger than a month's groceries. Each story is a match. Together they become a line of fire that advances toward the stage Sierra built. Damien lifts the keys and addresses the people who were always the point. The clubhouse isn't closing for spite. It's closing because the power inside it forgot why doors open. He promises them a place that belongs to families first. A schedule written in plain words, rules that defend instead of feed on fear. The words carry because they cost him something to say. Sierra laughs, a brittle sound that tries to make hope look naive. The first officer asks Sierra a simple question. Did she authorize late-night visits to Damien's property? She answers with a speech that doesn't contain yes or no. He asks again. She pivots to emergency powers. He asks again. Eventually, silence is the only answer left in her throat. He writes another citation. Then informs her that any attempt to tear down the banner or force entry will be treated as criminal mischief. She stares at the paper like it is written in a language that never includes her. Damien steps down one stair, and the crowd leans in with him. He thanks the officers for documenting what too many people endured alone. He thanks the neighbors for showing courage in daylight. He thanks the treasurer for the shard of honesty that might become a spine. Sierra interrupts with a charge of slander. Damien replies with 3 names and 2 dates. A trail of vendor invoices routed through a shell company with a last name that matches hers by marriage. The gasp is a wave. The treasurer's head drops like a stone. She lunges again, but it's not for the papers this time. It's for control. The first officer's palm meets the space between them and doesn't move. He explains the next step in neutral tones. Statements, copies, case numbers. The process refuses to bend. Sierra falters, then pivots to the crowd, summoning the old language of order and respect, painting Damien as an anarchist who will turn their quiet streets into chaos. The words float a moment and sink without a ripple. A teenager near the front calls out that the only chaos here was the way fines multiplied overnight. A father adds that order without fairness is just fear with better stationery. The crowd murmurs in agreement. Sierra's eyes flash, hunting for the few loyal faces left. The board members avoid her gaze. Power, for the first time, looks lonely. Damien takes a slow breath. He turns to Sierra and lowers his voice so that only the first row can hear. But the words move anyway, carried by expression more than sound. He tells her there is one more step he hasn't revealed. One last measure she never imagined someone like him would attempt. And it involves oversight that lives far above neighborhood rules. He doesn't name the office. He doesn't need to. Whatever she's been hiding reaches her eyes before it reaches her tongue. Her shoulders rock back as if the wind hit her. The first officer asks if either party needs medical attention. Sierra laughs again, too loudly, then stumbles over an answer that tries to sound invincible and lands as a plea. Damien pockets the keys and says he's fine. He nods to the officers and assures them copies will be filed within hours. The second officer affirms that the reports will include every video and statement gathered today. The formality of the promise feels like a closing chorus. Sierra recovers with a threat dressed in grammar. She swears there will be an injunction, a countersuit, a campaign to expose Damien's motives. He answers with a half-smile that isn't triumph so much as relief. He tells her motives don't matter when facts carry their own weight. The treasurer finally looks up and asks, barely audible, "What happens to the board now?" Damien says the board will answer to the same rules they used as a weapon, and for once, the weapon will answer back. The first officer signals that he and his partner are leaving to file, but they'll remain nearby. Phones lower, then lift again as someone whispers that this isn't over. Damien agrees. He tells the crowd to go home with their heads high and their cameras higher. Because sunlight has a way of making threats shrink. Sierra steps forward like she might try one more performance. Damien beats her to the mark by setting a folder on the step and tapping the top page. An envelope addressed to a state office that has no interest in neighborhood politics and every interest in fraud. Her breath shortens. Color leaves, then returns, too fast. For a heartbeat, she looks younger, a person who chose the wrong ladder and climbed until the air thinned. Then pride returns with armor, and she hisses that he will regret whatever he thinks he's done. Damien answers softly that regret belongs to those who keep receipts for other people's pain and none for their own decisions. The crowd absorbs the line like medicine. He pockets the envelope again, not as a tease, but as a countdown she can feel. He tells her the next scene isn't happening on these steps. It's happening in offices where numbers speak louder than threats. She tries to laugh and finds the sound won't arrive. He turns away, offering the officers a final nod. The banner behind him doesn't move, but the feeling in the air does. The collective sense that a door slammed for the right reason. Neighbors begin to scatter, buzzing with the kind of energy that makes change contagious. Sierra stands alone for a dangerous second, deciding between retreat and spectacle. She chooses spectacle because she always has. She points at Damien's dock and screams that it will still be gone by morning, that she will find a way that he can't protect what he loves forever. Damien doesn't look back. He raises his hand with a simple gesture that stops more than traffic. Tomorrow, he says, and the word lands like a promise he intends to keep. A promise heavy enough to make even the boldest bully check the locks before sleeping. Morning breaks with a rumor that feels like a drumbeat, and by the time Damien steps onto the dock, the neighborhood is already waiting. Eyes tired but hungry for a win that finally sticks. He carries a single file and the same keys that shut the door on yesterday's arrogance. And when Sierra appears in white with a tight smile and a lawyer trailing 2 steps behind, the crowd stiffens like they've seen this act and won't clap for it again. Damien doesn't posture. He raises his hand for quiet and says the clubhouse will never again be used to threaten families. And today, he's proving it with something bigger than a banner. And the question slips through the crowd like a spark. What could be bigger than buying the stage they used to shame him? He starts with names, calm and surgical. A list of fines that bloomed like weeds. A sequence of votes pushed through without quorum. A pattern of selective enforcement that turned neighbors into prey. Sierra fires back with policy and posture, insisting the board followed procedure. Insisting he cherry-picked the worst moments. Insisting leadership means making unpopular choices for the greater good. Damien asks whose good was greater when the widow begged for an extension and was sent a threat. And the widow raises her hand in the crowd with tears that don't ask for permission to fall. And the air shifts because pain that has a name always overrules a speech, doesn't it? He opens the file and pulls out the notice that robs Sierra of breath before it robs her of power. The HOA, he says, was incorporated with the clubhouse parcel as its legal base of operations, and when that parcel passed to new ownership, the corporate standing collapsed like scaffolding with no anchor. He says he filed the dissolution at sunrise, and the state stamped it with a speed reserved for mistakes that should never have existed this long. The board is over, the bylaws are void, the fines are uncollectible. And the hall they worshipped can't rescue them from this math. And the crowd erupts because sometimes justice is just a document read at the right volume, right? Sierra tries to laugh, but it breaks into 2 pieces. The lawyer steps forward with a warning about injunctions, about emergency relief, about judges who dislike vigilantes. Damien replies that nothing about today is vigilante. It's housekeeping, and the house is finally clean. He lifts another sheet and reads the last transaction that doomed them. The landscaping contract routed through a shell. The checks signed by hands that forgot their signatures could be seen in daylight. And the treasurer winces like a man learning honesty late but hard. And the neighbors surge with the sound people make when private suspicions find public proof. How do you argue with your own handwriting? The first police officer returns, quiet and watchful, and the second follows with a folder of yesterday's statements. And their presence settles the scene into a shape no tantrum can bend. They confirm receipt of the video, confirm the citations, confirm that any attempt to remove the banner or harass the new owner will escalate to charges. Sierra squares her shoulders and announces that this is selective enforcement against community leaders. The officer answers that leadership without law is theater. And this isn't a stage anymore, and for the first time her voice fails to find a place to land. Isn't that the moment every bully fears? Damien faces the neighbors and does something Sierra never did. He asks what they need instead of telling them what to fear. A teacher calls out for tutoring nights. A single mother asks for a pantry. A retired carpenter offers to fix handrails for free on weekends. The dock kids shout for a summer program that teaches swimming and respect in the same afternoon. Damien nods, each idea stacking into a plan that feels like a heartbeat you can hear from across the water. And he promises the clubhouse will open as a community center without dues, without fines, without weaponized memos. And the cheer that answers him sounds like a neighborhood remembering its own name. Isn't that what power should have sounded like all along? Sierra snaps back to relevance with a sudden lunge toward litigation. She vows to sue every person clapping. She vows to freeze Damien's accounts. She vows to put a lien on the dock so aggressive the wood would feel it. Damien answers with a simple correction that strips her threats of skin. There's no board to authorize a suit. No bylaws to stand on, no treasury to fund the fight. And the lawyer beside her calculates the billable hours of a battle with no ground. And even he looks like a man reading a map that ends at a cliff. Can money buy a bridge when the land itself is gone? The officers step between words before they become mistakes. They issue Sierra a harassment citation for yesterday's outburst and a fresh one for interfering with evidence. And the pen scratching across carbon paper sounds like nails quietly closing a lid. Someone starts a small chant for Damien that he doesn't feed and doesn't stop. And it grows because relief needs a sound, and Sierra stands in the current of it, shrinking in a white suit that now reads like denial instead of purity. And the humiliation she served for years circles back with interest. Doesn't karma love compound rates? Damien raises the keys and flips them once, a careless arc that belies the weight of the moment, and catches them with a grin that finally reaches his eyes. He announces opening day in his father's name, a promise of free classes and open doors and an annual remembrance where rules protect instead of punish. A child asks if they can fish off the dock without a ticket. Damien says they can as long as they take turns and tell stories. The child laughs and the lake of faces laughs with him, because joy that simple is a policy no board ever had the courage to write, isn't it? Sierra makes one last sprint for control. A speech about standards and property values and outsiders ruining a vision she built. Damien answers with a soft line that cuts in the cleanest way. The highest value of any place is the people who feel safe in it. The words don't spike. They settle, and settling is worse for her because it means the decision has been made. And the crowd nods like a jury that didn't need to deliberate once the truth walked in wearing work boots. How many verdicts are this obvious and still arrive late? The officers start to disperse the crowd gently. But no one leaves until Damien points to tomorrow and says the surprise he promised is not spectacle, it's structure. He tells them there's a sign going up at noon that resets the story of this lake. A sign that declares in clear letters who the water is for and who it answers to. And Sierra scoffs that a sign changes nothing. But even she hears the tremor under her words because symbols outlive speeches. And this one will stand where her power fell. What does it say when ink on a board outlasts a decade of threats? He turns to go, then stops and looks back at Sierra. Not with triumph, but with a steadiness that refuses to hate what it already defeated. He tells her the door is closed, but the lesson is open, and if she decides to learn it, she can stand at the ribbon tomorrow like anyone else and applaud a future that doesn't include fear. The invitation is genuine, and the crowd hears it. And that sincerity wounds her in a place no citation can reach. Because mercy from the person you tried to break is a mirror. And mirrors are cruel to the stories we tell ourselves. Can she face what she sees if she looks? Damien pockets the keys and the file, gives the officers a nod that feels like punctuation, and strides down the boards with the calm of someone who traded rage for purpose and won the bargain. Behind him, the chatter swells into plans, into volunteers, into lists that grow legs. And ahead of him waits the sign that will end the argument before it starts. He doesn't say what it will read, not yet. He lets the question hang in the quiet space where curiosity turns into compulsion. And the entire neighborhood leans toward noon as if a single word might rewrite everything they thought they were living under. What would you paint if you could rename your own street tomorrow? By noon, the lakefront feels like a verdict waiting to be read. Damien steps onto the dock with a folder pressed flat and his father's keyring warm in his fist. Sierra arrives with the last of her allies orbiting at a nervous distance. White suit flawless, smile stretched thin. He doesn't waste anyone's courage. He starts with the list no one was meant to hear. Forged votes logged at midnight. Appeals lost in transit, fines doubled when widows asked for time. Each line lands like a gavel. A murmur rises, not angry yet, just awake. Sierra charges the narrative before it hardens. She calls it misinterpretation, a smear campaign by a man with a vendetta. Damien answers with receipts, not rage. He reads vendor payments routed through a shell that shares her family name, landscaping invoices padded like pillows for a fall that never came. Consulting fees that bought nothing but silence. The treasurer breaks, shoulders trembling, saying he signed what he was given and prayed it was right. He says he cannot pray this away. The crowd absorbs his confession like rain into dry ground. The first officer steps forward and confirms the investigation is open. That statements from yesterday are filed, that the county has already requested the board's ledgers. The second officer adds that the video of the late-night trespass has been authenticated, timestamps intact. Sierra tries to pivot to safety again, to the dock, two rules designed to sound caring while cutting deep. Damien answers softly that safety without humanity is control in uniform. A teacher near the front nods like someone who has had enough of being managed. Damien raises the final sheet and it changes the air. He says the HOA's legal standing hinged on the Clubhouse parcel. That when the parcel transferred, the corporate legs snapped. He says the dissolution is filed and accepted. The board is no longer a board. The bylaws are no longer law. The fines are on collectible debts that should never have existed. For a heartbeat, even the loudest phones forget to record. Then the neighborhood erupts with the kind of cheer people say for news that lifts weight from the chest. Sierra rallies, calling him a vandal dressed in paperwork. The lawyer at her shoulder warns of emergency relief, injunctions, judges who dislike surprises. Damien replies that the only surprise here is honesty, and the only emergency is how long it took to find it. He turns to the neighbors and asks for the first three needs they want met. Tutoring nights, a pantry, weekend repairs. He nods, sets the folder down, and declares the clubhouse will open to families, not to fear. The chant that follows is small, then large, then something that feels like a promise. A board member on the edge of the crowd begins to cry and steps forward without looking at Sierra. He admits he delivered notices to doors he knew couldn't pay, that he did it because he thought order mattered more than mercy, that he doesn't want to be that man anymore. He asks Damien if there's a way to help fix what he broke. Damien says yes, but not with speeches. Start with calls to everyone who gave up fighting. Bring them back. Apologize with action. The crowd's posture shifts again. Shame becomes fuel. Sierra lunges at hope like it's the enemy. She declares that property values will crash, that outsiders will flood the lake, that standards will rot. Damien doesn't bite. He asks a child to read the note taped to the folder. The child reads a single line in a clear voice. "This place belongs to the people who love it." The line is simple enough to cut through every monologue. Even the lawyer looks at his shoes. The officers begin distributing contact cards for formal statements. Neighbors line up, patient, steady. A veteran tells an officer he kept his head down for years because conflict felt like war. And he's tired of wars that start with a letter on a door. A single mother says she can bring rice, beans, and 2 extra hours a week. A retired carpenter volunteers to train teens in repairs so no one gets fined for a crooked hinge again. Every offer is a brick. A building begins without blueprints. Sierra turns, desperate, to the few board members left. She orders them to rally the block captains, to call the association's attorney to freeze the account. Silence returns nothing. The treasurer whispers that the account is empty. The secretary says the captains quit. Power flickers like a light switching off in the middle of a sentence. Sierra stares at Damien with something closer to fear than fury. "How did you do this?" He answers that he didn't. They did. He just gave them the truth loud enough to hear over the rules. He lifts one last document, not to wound, but to finish the wound's story. Complaints from families who moved after being harassed for small things that were never small to them. Names and dates, nothing more, because facts honor pain by being precise. Sierra snaps that people who can't follow guidelines should live elsewhere. Damien says people who can't lead with compassion should never lead at all. The officers do not react, but the crowd does, with a sharp swell of breath that feels like the moment a tide chooses a direction. A hush falls that isn't fragile. It's focused. Damien steps to the edge of the dock and says the sentence he saved for last. The era of punishment is over. The era of participation begins. He announces an open sign tomorrow with hours that include those who work nights, with events that include those who never felt welcome. He names the center after his father, not as a monument, but as a manual. Teach, include, repair, repeat. Hands rise to volunteer before he finishes the syllables. Sierra tries one last angle. A whisper sharpened into a blade. She tells Damien she will haunt every inch of this neighborhood until he begs for the board to return. He answers without heat that hauntings only work on people who believe the past is stronger than the present. The lawyer steps back to paces, writing nothing now. The treasurer removes his name badge and hands it to a child who looks confused, then proud, then relieved to see an adult do the right thing when it is late, but still. Right. Damien thanks the officers by name and the neighbors by sight. He promises copies of everything to the county and to anyone who asks. He closes the folder and asks the crowd one last question. Are you ready to run your own home? The answer is a roar, not angry, just certain. Sierra inhales to shout over it and finds nothing left to spend. Power without trust is just noise. Today, noise lost. He turns to leave and stops. He looks at Sierra, not cruel, not kind, simply finished. Tomorrow at noon, he says, the sign goes up. If she wants to prove that she ever cared about this place more than control, she can show up and clap with everyone else. The invitation hangs between them like a test only she can grade. Her jaw tightens. She says he will regret this by nightfall. Damien shakes his head. Nightfall has already chosen a side. He steps off the dock as neighbors crowd around to plan the evening, to bring tables, to list needs on scrap paper that will grow into schedules. The officers move with a line of people ready to swear to what they saw and to what they suffered. Sierra stares at the water with empty hands and a future that doesn't ask for her permission anymore. She turns as if to leave, then stops, eyes fixed on the folder Damien carries, mind racing toward a final, reckless idea that could undo more than his victory. She glances at her phone, then at the clubhouse keys, then at the thin path no one else sees. Whatever she chooses next won't be a meeting or a memo. It will be a strike in the dark, and the threat of it follows Damien home like a shadow that refuses to blink. Night arrives with the kind of hush that makes promises nervous. Damien can feel the ripple before he hears it, a click of metal where metal shouldn't be, a shape moving with the urgency of someone who believes darkness can still deliver a win. He steps from the porch with his phone already recording. Sierra crouches at the clubhouse door, white suit, ghostly and tense. Bolt cutters biting at the banner chain, jaw set like an oath she can't afford to break. He says her name once, quiet, enough to sound like mercy, loud enough to sound like consequence. She startles, then doubles down, insisting she's reclaiming order, insisting the neighborhood needs her hand. He answers that order without trust is a cage, and tonight the key isn't hers. The patrol car pulls in without drama. The same officers step out with tired patience and a practiced steadiness that has nothing to prove. They document the tool, the attempt, the fresh gouge at the lock. Sierra pleads policy. The officer replies with code. She reaches again. The cuffs arrive like punctuation. Neighbors appear in doorways, faces pale and wide, phones lifting then, lowering in the awkward sympathy reserved for people who built the fall they now suffer. Damien doesn't gloat. He tells the officers he won't press additional charges if this ends here, if statements are filed and the line is respected. The first officer nods and turns to Sierra with a final simple ask. Choose the right ending. She looks everywhere but at the people she once commanded. Pride argues, calculation wins. She lowers her eyes and allows herself to be guided away, not as a leader, not as a victim, just as a person who mistook control for care. The patrol car rolls off. The street XHALES. Morning finds the dock already ringed with neighbors, carrying folding tables and hope that looks like work. Damien sets a wrapped parcel on the railing and calls everyone close enough to hear honesty without microphones. He thanks the ones who risked being visible, the ones who showed up twice, the ones who were quiet for years and finally said enough. He lifts a weathered tackle box and tells them it belonged to the man who taught him that building is louder than revenge. He sets it beside the new sign still face down, then raises a pair of bolt cutters and snaps the old HOA lockbox free from the post where it bullied childhoods and emptied wallets. He holds it up so everyone can see the rust that hid under fresh paint, then tosses it into the water with a splash that sounds like a chapter closing itself. The cheer that follows cracks something open and lets light in. He turns the sign, and the message is simple enough to feel like a rule worth remembering. Lake access is for families, not fines. Community center open to all. No HOA authority. Quiet falls and then returns as a roar. Not angry, not wild, just glad. Sierra's lawyer watches from the edge and says nothing because there is nothing left to say. The treasurer approaches with an apology that fits in a palm and asks to help set chairs. Damien nods and hands him a stack, not as forgiveness, but as work that earns it. The widow who once had to choose between groceries and a handrail climbs the steps and says she brought lemonade. The child who read the note yesterday asks if he can be the first to ring the opening bell. Damien taps the new sign with his knuckles and says, "Ring it by living here better than yesterday." He takes the parcel from the railing and unwraps a wooden plaque carved with a name that made him strong. He mounts it over the door with 2 careful strikes. The Cross Lake Center isn't a monument. It's a promise in plain wood. He steps back and tells them what the first month looks like. Nights for tutoring and patching resumes. Saturdays for fixing what fines turned into fear. Sundays for teaching. Kids to swim, to share the dock, to tell stories that keep them human. A retired nurse raises her hand and offers health checks twice a week. The veteran volunteers to mentor teenagers who keep finding trouble because trouble keeps finding them. A local baker donates bread and swears he'll show up even after the cameras turn away. The list grows a spine and starts to walk through it all. Damien keeps the tempo steady, turning every cheer into a task, every tear into a chair, every name into a role. He refuses titles and accepts help. He keeps his humor sharp enough to cut tension without drawing blood, poking fun at the idea that a door can be dangerous while thanking the officers for proving that law can be calm. When someone asks what happens to the fines already paid, he says the state will decide on restitution and he will push for it with the same force they once used to push people around. He promises transparency, not perfection, and that honesty lands better than any slogan. Sierra returns at dusk with eyes that have learned something the hard way. No entourage, no lawyer, no white armor bright enough to blind anyone to the truth. She stands at the edge of the crowd and watches kids toss lines off the dock like they're throwing away the last 2 years. She watches the widow laugh at a joke that isn't very good and matters anyway. She watches the treasurer wipe sweat from his forehead with a relief he didn't earn until today. She steps closer and asks Damien if the invitation to clap was real. He nods once. She claps twice, small and stiff, then more. And no one cheers and no one jeers. They just let it happen because dignity isn't a trophy. It's a door you stop slamming as the evening leans toward its last brightness. Damien opens the tackle box and takes out a lure scarred by years that felt longer than they were. He says he kept it for this moment. He says memory belongs in motion, not in a glass case. He casts it as the neighborhood counts under their breath, and when the lure disappears into distance, something heavy lifts inside his chest. He tells them the dock is safe because they made it safe. The center is open because they opened it. And this lake belongs to whoever chooses care over control, every hour of every day forward. He asks the question he started with and lets it land differently now. What would you do when someone tries to take what is yours? 100 hands point not at him but at each other. The officers walk by one more time, not to police a crowd, but to accept a paper cup of lemonade and a plate of cookies shoved into their hands by children who decided that authority can also be a neighbor. They nod to Damien and say the reports are filed. The case keeps moving. The videos and statements will stand where speeches fall. He thanks them for showing up with steadiness instead of noise. They thank him for making their job easier by making his neighborhood kinder. Night pulls close without menace. Damien gathers the last of the folded tables and hears his father's laugh and the sound of kids counting steps on the dock. He looks at the banner across the clubhouse door and no longer tastes the bitterness that hung there yesterday. He looks at Sierra, seated alone at the edge of the crowd, and chooses to leave her with the only punishment that ever teaches: a front row seat to a better story unfolding without her permission. He turns to the people, waiting for what comes next, and gives it to them in 3 words that have more power than any bylaw ever printed. See you tomorrow.